Iceland is known as the land of fire and ice because of its volcanoes and its glaciers, but climate change is changing the look of that country. A new documentary by local director Mark Terry delves into those changes. We are going to be talking with him in a second. He is a faculty member in Wilfrid Laurier University's Department of English and Film Studies, and his film is being screened later today at the UN Climate Change Conference in Scotland. He joins us now from Glasgow. I will say just right, it's afternoon there now, Mark, so good afternoon to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, it's just past noon.
Yes. Right. The Changing Face of Iceland. Tell us about the doc.
Okay, well, this is a very interesting project because, like my other documentaries, this is the third in a trilogy of polar documentaries that focus on the impacts of climate change at the ends of the Earth. And with this particular film, we focus on what's happening in Iceland.
Why did you make this?
Well, it's part of my ongoing research, and I think it's very important that we look at what's happening in the polar regions because it's kind of the bellwether for the rest of the world. For example, most of the methane that we're dealing with in the atmosphere today is coming out of the melting permafrost in the Arctic, and that's impacting on the entire world. So it's very important to look at the polar regions. And Iceland is kind of unique because it is a heavy populated island nation. And we get to see how the impacts of climate change affect the people and the flora and the fauna in Iceland.
Right. And what reaction has there been to the previous films there that you've made that have led to change?
Well, yeah, it kind of all began in 2009 with the Antarctica Challenge, A Global Warning. That film premiered at the Copenhagen Conference, COP15, way back then. And it was important because it was International Polar Year that year, and there weren't a lot of scientists available to attend the conference because they were still embedded in Antarctica. So the idea came that because I made a film showcasing their work, that it would be screened to the delegates and negotiators and world leaders at the COP conference. Well, that kind of started the ball rolling. They asked me to do a similar film on the Arctic for the next climate conference, and that was in Cancun, COP16. And the interesting thing that happened there was the content of the film, in particular dealing with the collapse of the Petermann Glacier in Greenland, actually led to a resolution being added to the Cancun Accord.
Wow. So there was the Antarctica Challenge, A Global Warning, and the Polar Explorer, both
That's
screened
right.
at UN climate conferences. What's that like, Mark, to have your stuff given such a global platform?
Yeah, well, it's very flattering, of course, but it has something to do with the particular style of documentary that I use. It's the expository mode. So it's not this finger-wagging kind of documentary that activists usually make. This is basically a scientific report of what's going on there, and it showcases the scientists doing the research and showing their findings. This is known as visible evidence in documentary filmmaking, and this provides a visual context that the policymakers, who I should point out are not necessarily scientists, they use that to help understand the scientific papers that are presented to them.
Oh.
So it bridges the communications gap between science and policy.
Now, you've been to other conferences like this. We keep hearing that this one, they're all do or die, but there's a lot being placed specifically on this COP26. Are you noticing anything different about this one?
Well, yeah, the biggest difference I noticed was the world leaders showed up in the first 2 days, and usually they show up in the second week of the COP conferences. So the very fact that they came this early, this shows that they're very intent on coming up with commitments that are substantial. And they did. If you see what Biden suggested and even Trudeau, to be carbon neutral in 2030 is a huge commitment. And many countries in the first couple of days here made those commitments.
Now, you're screening your documentary later today. Ultimately, what do you hope the people there take away from your film?
Well, I think the greatest thing that we show in the film, the most significant aspect of the film is the fact that when the glaciers are melting in Iceland, they are relieving pressure that's keeping the magma rivers that are underground at bay. But now that they're disappearing, that pressure is being relieved. It's kind of like a pressure cooker, right? And so now we're seeing more volcanic activity. And this is very, very dangerous for the people that live there. We saw the recent eruption just outside of Reykjavik earlier in March, and that's a direct result of the weight coming off the magma rivers because of the melting glaciers.
Well, Mark, I hope it goes well for you today. I hope you enjoy your time there. It was a real treat talking to you. Thanks for this.
Oh, my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
That's filmmaker Mark Terry. He's a faculty member in Wilfrid Laurier University's Department of English and Film Studies. He has directed the film The Changing Face of Iceland. It is being screened later today at the UN Climate Change Conference in Scotland, and that is from where he joined us in Glasgow.